Welcome back. Our second session of the day is under our digital and smart theme and focuses on the very popular topic of talent management and career development in BIM. I'm sure lots of you have tuned in for this session already, so I'd like to quickly remind you all that you can send in your questions. So please do keep those coming in. We'll be asking those at the end of the session. A big thank you, first and foremost, to our sponsor, BSI. Let's get started now and welcome our speakers. Rahul Shah, Client Director for Built Environment at BSI. Charlotte Brody, the Global Head of Marketing for Built Environment at BSI. And Mike Stylianou, the Global Training Qualifications Manager for BSI. And it's now over to Rahul Shah.
Hello and welcome to BSI and to today's webinar, Talent Management and Career Development in BIM. My name is Charlotte Brody. I'm the Global Head of Marketing for the Built Environment at BSI, and I'm going to be joined by two experts today, Rahul Shah and Mike Stylianou. Rahul Shah is our Client Director for EMEA, Built Environment, and brings with him direct experience from working for and with asset owners, main contractors, architects, engineers and manufacturers. With over 23 years of experience, he's held leadership roles responsible for driving digital transformation and leading on BIM strategy and implementing programs globally. And we also welcome Mike. Mike is our Global Training Qualifications Manager. Having worked in a range of awarding organisations, he's developed a profound knowledge of assessment, standards, curriculum and qualification design and delivery in both the academic and vocational sectors. And more recently, he's used this knowledge to promote and implement qualifications and educational products in overseas markets with a particular focus on the Middle East and Asia. And I'm really looking forward to welcoming you on today's session. So moving on to explain a little bit about BSI, many of you will be familiar with us as the UK's national standards body, and we have a strict governance around our business streams and are incorporated by Royal Charter. Our product portfolio is extensive and we support clients globally through standard shaping, whether this be British, international, publicly available specifications or bespoke standards, and providing technical support and guidance from our Knowledge Solutions business. And we provide assurance, training and certification services to help clients around the world embed and demonstrate best practice through the adoption of standards. And we also offer consultancy. Our purpose is inspiring trust for a more resilient world. We help to shape and guide innovation through improving and standardizing business processes, products and services to enable advancement. We're independent and free from any outside influence, as all profit is reinvested in BSI to help us to continue to support further change, working constantly to serve industry and striving to find new ways and solutions that enable organisations to survive, stabilise, rebuild and be resilient. And I'd like to share a little bit of information about our sector and the areas of focus. You can see a simple graphic on the screen showing how we support clients across the entire breadth of the built environment asset lifecycle. And we are focusing on 4 key areas where clients may be facing challenges and where we can help: digital transformation, regulatory, health and safety, sustainability, and supply chain and procurement. So moving on, here's today's agenda. Firstly, Mike is going to walk you through the first half of the agenda and will cover talent management, a route to achieving positive business outcomes, and he will explore how structured learning can support career development, talent retention and business success. And then Rahul will look at using BIM to support the digitalisation of your business and improve efficiency. So thank you very much. And I will now hand over to Mike Stylianou.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Stylianou, and I'm the Global Training Qualifications Manager here at BSI. As Charlotte has outlined, I would like to start by talking a little bit more about talent management and a strategy behind implementing a talent management process. and then also looking at the importance of talent management, but then deep diving a little bit more into the learning and development side of talent management and evaluating learning solutions that you can implement to contribute to your overall talent management strategy. So let's begin. So there are many ways of defining a talent management strategy, and there are various models and iterations of the talent management lifecycle. And here is just one that I've decided to use that I find is most accessible in terms of terminology. So life cycles can be customized so that they relate or they are unique to specific company cultures, whilst others you'll find are more general and provide higher level guidance. But whichever way an organization wishes to define it, in essence, the life cycle begins by identifying the first steps where a company engages with prospective employees and continues through to show how these employees, once they've been hired and onboarded, move through the company. So the life cycle continues as it outlines the next steps once they've been onboarded, the next steps in the employee's career progression. So with all these steps strategically organized, employers can leverage the best use of their own human capital to contribute to the realization of the higher level or the wider organizational goals. So amongst the primary challenges for recruiters include trying to match employees to jobs based on their ability to manage on-the-job responsibilities. But past this, there's also a challenge to understand what the employee is seeking through compensation, reward, but also through ongoing investment in their own professional development. And this is where the life cycle steps in, and where organizations can map these challenges to identify where programs can be implemented for their employees. So we'll move on and just talk about the importance of implementing a talent management strategy. So there's a wide range of important advantages to outline in terms of the benefits that a well-defined talent management strategy can bring. But I've decided to concentrate on a few that I found are the most applicable to those working in the BIM industry, having spoken to a range of people working in this industry and those who have fed back as to what the main challenges they face when it comes to sourcing and managing BIM talent. So these are some of the important points, benefits of implementing talent management strategy. Firstly, building a high-performing workforce. The implementation of a talent management strategy can contribute to building a high-performing workforce, but it's really important not to simply define this to mean it's the same as a group of high-performing individuals, but we need to think about this on a more organizational level. So positioning the right talent across a workforce and across a team that work as a collective is the ultimate vehicle for efficiency and results. Attracting, securing, and retaining highly skilled employees. Now, clients have outlined that this is one of the biggest challenges within BIM. So strong talent management strategy will support the recruitment of the most talented or skilled, suitably qualified employees available. And that strategy in itself helps employers build their own organizational brand, which works on its own to attract talent, and as a result, leads to increased business performance. A well-structured onboarding process also is likely to lead to higher levels of retention and thus a reduction in long-term recruitment costs, whereby you're replacing people who then haven't been at the company for very long, or even performance management costs. So going through the performance management process, gaining evidence to use during the performance management process. Increasing organizational productivity and employee efficiency. So the top level organizational strategy must be borne in mind when selecting employees. So a match between the two means that the employee will work comfortably to organizational goals, thus reducing, again, any issues in performance. So further down the line, without a well-defined talent management strategy, you may find that the journey of the employee is not quite relating to the organizational goals. But having one in place allows the employee to identify themselves identify their own position within an organization, essentially as a cog in the organization, thus keeping them engaged, motivated, and far more efficient. So addressing and filling talent gaps. So talent management also assists organizations in identifying and preparing for gaps in talent and skills, and encourages organizations to have a plan to address these. So it helps massively with succession planning. This means that should a gap arise, organizations can respond quickly to fill those gaps, either internally or externally, but essentially reduces pressure on other employees or other areas of the business that need to pick up workload that's been left behind by leavers. So later on in the presentation, my colleague Rahul will explore some of these factors in more depth and with more explicit reference to BIM. But for now, I want to take a closer look at the learning and development sector of talent management. So let's move on. So as you saw in the talent management lifecycle, one of the factors was learning and development, and this is what I want to explore in a little bit more detail. So learning, it can be divided into two very discrete categories, structured learning and unstructured learning. But what do we mean by these terms? A structured way of learning essentially is a learning solution that has a very defined learning path with objectives, structure, or some sort of formal hierarchy. Whereas unstructured learning, as the name suggests, there is no formal structure to the learning, but is more trial and error, is more on the job, individualistic, informal. It's a more informal way of learning. That said, it's very important here to understand that both an employee will experience both. Both are applicable to an employee, and unstructured learning and structured learning should coexist in harmony. An employee will adopt both during their time at a business, and both have their own advantages. But just to give you some examples of what structured and unstructured learning are. So structured learning could be any training program that has multiple courses or modules, any course that has objectives or outcomes. It could be a qualification, it could be an academic or vocational qualification, it could even be a university course or a degree. Whereas unstructured learning could be attending a webinar like we are today, attending or speaking at conferences, peer-to-peer knowledge sharing, or even engaging with social media with content that's relatable to the industry. And it's also quite worthwhile to note here that these examples can also be applied in the CPD setting. There are many programs which designate, which ask for employees to aggregate a certain number of minimum hours of CPD to then become either qualified or certified. And the CPD is sometimes referred to as formal and informal CPD. But essentially the same rule applies here, and the words that we're using for structured and unstructured learning can be used in place of formal and informal CPD. So there's no right or wrong approach here. Both are completely applicable. It's usually the case when an employee is starting out at a business that structured learning really comes into play, as they need to be guided through a learning path so they can understand a certain topic to a certain level. But further down the line, if you think of an employee who's been at an organization for a long time, the structured learning might start to ease off a little bit, and unstructured learning in the form of research, in the form of engaging with other people in the industry to advance their own knowledge might come into play. So you can see how they can coexist here, but might occur at different times in an employee's time at an organization. But what I want to do now is just focus in even more depth at the structured learning side of talent management. So let's move on. So what is the impact of structured learning on talent management? Well, with time, a performing employee organically builds and develops their own professional expertise. So with time, many years of an organization, they become experts in their field through the acquisition of their own professional experience. However, there is still a requirement for the organization to identify areas of training or learning that can ultimately complement or support the employee's development of expertise and can contribute to their overall professional development. Human capital needs organizational investment and reinvestment to support an employee's development, and a structured learning plan can certainly help with crafting a learning program specific to that employee. So by evaluating the structure of the learning program that an organization is considering, it's possible to identify whether the learning responds directly to the business need. So with so many different learning solutions out there for organizations to choose from, organizations need to be ready to be able to discriminate between the solutions and decide justifiably which is the right solution for them. And a structured learning program makes that much, much easier, as it will be clear what the objective of the learning program is. This avoids the problem of enrolling employees on multiple courses in the hope that one or more of the courses will eventually fill that skill gap. So structured learning solutions ensure that organizations can choose the right learning product for the employee in the very first instance. And furthermore, learning programs with structured outcomes makes it easier for organizations to understand whether they are receiving a return on their investment, and if so, where. So we've understood how learning and development fits in with the wider talent management strategy. Organizations, like we've said, are presented with a huge range of learning solutions for their employees, but I would like to provide some hints and tips, maybe a little bit of insight into how best scrutinize these solutions to ensure that you are choosing the most appropriate learning for your employees. And there are multiple ways to do this. And I first want to start by looking at learning outcomes. Let's move on. So learning outcomes, you may have seen this when selecting training or courses or any kind of learning solution, but essentially what are learning outcomes? Learning outcomes are statements that describe the knowledge or skills that delegates should acquire by the end of a particular course or training or assignment, and they help delegates understand why that knowledge and those skills will be useful to them. They're designed by everybody who feeds into building a learning solution and all the supporting material that comes with it, and also the assessment that comes with it too. They're really important in that they help a trainer or a tutor provide targeted feedback on a delegate's performance. They also help a delegate keep track of their own progress through learning, but most useful of all, they're so high level that they allow a delegate to communicate to others, either peers, management, whoever, as to what they have learned through their training, through their learning, and what they can do. So like we said, learning outcomes are written at a very high level and provide a signpost to the main areas of learning. So we shouldn't be expecting learning outcomes to cover every single aspect that is mentioned or featured in the course. They're usually presented in a way which outlines what the delegate will be able to do. And you can see here that it all begin with a verb. So for this example, at the end of the learning program, the learner will understand the importance of democracy, be able to describe the different forms of precipitation, be able to identify the trends in global population growth. Multiple topics, and this is a very strange training course if you look at the learning outcomes, but this is for example's sake. But the main idea I want you to focus on here is just noting that all of these learning outcomes begin with a verb. So we'll revert back to this verb concept shortly. But now I want to just focus on the assessment side of things and look at assessment criteria. So we move on. So for learning solutions that are underpinned by an assessment criteria form the basis upon which the assessment, be it an exam, be it a portfolio of evidence, but the basis upon which any assessment is based or is built. With the learning outcomes firmly defined, as we saw in the previous slide, assessment criteria are then expanded, they're created to measure to what extent the delegate has met the learning outcome. So assessment criteria provide delegates with information about the qualities, the characteristics, and aspects of an assessment task that will be used to measure their attainment of each of the learning outcomes. So much like the learning outcome, they can provide targeted feedback as to the delegate's performance in the assessment and show which areas of learning the delegate has performed well and not so well. But here we can see an example of the expanded learning outcomes and the assessment criteria that have been created from those learning outcomes. And note again the use of the command verbs in the assessment criteria: explain, outline, analyze, evaluate. There is a logical process behind the verbs used in learning outcomes and assessment criteria, and I want to give you a bit more information as to how these command verbs are chosen. So let's move on, and I can explain to you how Bloom's taxonomy comes into play here. So there is a logical system behind using verbs to define learning outcomes and assessment criteria, and it is called Bloom's taxonomy. So those with experience in assessment and curriculum development will be familiar with this concept. But for those unfamiliar with this diagram, the taxonomy is essentially a way of creating a hierarchy of cognitive skills. So from the least complex, so the lower order at remember, to the most complex at create. And we'll look in a little bit more detail as to what these words actually mean. But it uses an overarching verb to classify each level of skill. So it's, like I said, remember being the lowest order, to create at the top. But if we dig a little deeper into each level, there is a multitude, of other command verbs that you will find. So if we think about remember, you will come across verbs in the learning outcomes and assessments like list, outline, define, name, essentially asking delegates to recall information, one process to recall the information and then present it either in assessment or in a training course. But if we think about apply, which is slightly further up the taxonomy, you will experience verbs such as calculate or solve or demonstrate, which is asking more from the delegates. There's more of a requirement of more cognitive skills to get to the solution. But all the way to the top, if we look at evaluate or create, so for evaluate, you'll come across verbs like choose, support, justify, convince, which will ask delegates to critically analyze the information that's presented to them and evaluate the best course of action, for example. And create at the top, you might see verbs like design, invent, create, compose, which is using what the delegate has learned to create something on their own, off their own back, from their own experience and what they've learned. So this is the way cognitive skills are classified. And if we move to the next slide, we'll give a brief definition and an overview as to what these words actually mean on a higher level. So remember, like I said, recalling information, understand, identifying examples of a given term, all the way up to create, which is a generation of new ideas or products. So when looking into training solutions, there is a lot of information to actually look at, which might not seem as important on the surface, but look carefully at the learning outcomes and assessment criteria. The command words that are used can give you guidance as to the complexity of the learning and the expectations of the delegate. So rather than deep dive into all the command words that fall into each category, I think it was a little better to give a top level definition of each level of the taxonomy to better understand what cognitive skill we are testing at each level. So just to move on from the structured learning, I want to focus on the benefits to an organization of choosing learning solutions that are structured. We can talk about organizational reputation. Like we said earlier with the talent management strategy, investing in a structured learning program for your employees will ultimately lead to the increase in organizational reputation as an investor in people. And that will then by extension lead to better performance for your employees, which will ultimately lead to higher customer confidence and satisfaction. But also increasing an organization's competitiveness and credibility when putting together a well-qualified and well-trained team to pitch for business or to bid for tenders. But not only that, for organizations to increase their internal standards and set the bar. So let's move on. So here are some more higher level benefits to structured learning that could that relates to the employee. So increased motivation, they're engaged, they've been given a structured learning plan that's suited to their needs. Employee loyalty, staff retention, reduction in recruitment costs, as we mentioned earlier, more effective succession planning, the agility and capability of employees, and ultimately increased productivity and effectiveness. Move on. But what does that mean from an employee perspective? So acquiring a certification or qualification or going through training or going through some sort of structured learning plan also means joining a team of other people who are doing the same thing. So joining a community of other learners with profound skills and experience in this field. So belonging to such a community provides a chance to receive career guidance as well as advice and support in situations that relate to industry. But not only that, an expanded network can help not only in a personal capacity, but in professional capacity in seeking out new business and business development. And we can also talk about how this keeps an employee up to date with changes in industry, as we'll see on the next slide. So structured learning is usually part of a wider learning timeline. It doesn't usually exist on its own. It forms part of a wider suite of learning solutions. So delegates can build upon their expertise and decide which direction they want their training to take because it forms part of a structured process. And further down the line, as they go through this process, they can specialize in certain areas of their interest. And providers make sure that all new courses and programs respond to any changes in industry that are becoming more essential and provide an opportunity for delegates, for employees to gain a broader understanding of these areas. And what I want to talk about next, very briefly, is how qualifications can be used as a tool for structured learning. So on the next slide, I'd like to talk about that in a little bit more detail. So qualifications, in the vast majority of cases, exist as a suite, allowing a learner to move through the process and acquire different qualifications along the way. A suite of qualifications will be underpinned by the subject content, as we can see here with the standard underpinning these qualifications, but then can be classified by level in terms of the complexity of the content that is covered in each qualification, or by the breadth of the qualification, excuse me, in terms of the length of time it takes for delegates to acquire the knowledge and complete the assessment. But whichever way, they're created to form a learning pathway, which allows delegates to progress through a learning timeline from beginners or foundation all the way up to advanced and upper level qualifications or professional development programs. So organizations can then select the starting point for their delegate depending on the knowledge that has already been acquired or their experience in industry, and get them started on their qualification journey. So if we move on, just want to talk briefly about the qualification development process. Qualifications, of course, are a bit of an abstract idea, but it's really important to note the development work that goes into creating a qualification. So it's not just assessment experts that are aggregating content and putting assessments into place. As part of the qualification development process, subject matter experts, consultants, organizations, delegates, employees, trainers, even governments are all consulted and their input fed into the qualification development process. Also, where policy and regulation need to come into place, standards, things like this, these all feed back into the qualification development process. There are a multitude of entities coming into the qualification process to ensure that that qualification is relevant and fit for purpose. And finally, I'd just like to talk about how qualifications essentially are the bridge between theory and practice, as we'll see on the next slide. So given the large amount of input into qualifications for those in industry, as we've just seen, it's possible to say that qualifications, they're not just a way for delegates to obtain knowledge, but also a way for delegates to gain skills that they can apply in industry. So this feedback cycle between everybody involved in the development of qualifications ensures that qualifications are up to date, they are relevant, and they provide a springboard for delegates to learn, to progress, and develop. So qualifications are working very, very hard to bridge the gap between theory and practice.
Hello, everyone. As my colleague Mike just talked about the science and logic behind the talent management, it's incredibly useful from the organization's point of view. How the talent management can be leveraged to not only look after your human capital, but actually to gain competitive advantage. So if we can begin, Charlotte, please. Since this, as Charlotte said, today's webinar is all about applying those talent management and structural learning principles to the BIM skills in your business. But before we dive into that, what is BIM? BIM is about a collaborative way of working. It defines a set of processes to manage, produce, and exchange information throughout the project life cycle, including design, construction, commissioning, and into operation of building or infrastructure. So moving on, why BIM training? And if we just reflect back on Mike's some of the points, through his presentation, previous presentation, training, it's two ways of training: structured learning and unstructured learning. And I'm pretty sure you would have experienced this in the BIM sphere as well. How your staff or you yourself would have learned sometimes unstructured as well as have some structured learning. But if we look at the BIM implementation at a business level, there are three key ingredients that makes it successful. Obviously, people being the biggest ingredient of all. It's the people who need to own that BIM implementation. It's the people who need to make it as part of their daily life, or whatever their job function is, and need to have their job function specific BIM input or engagement with the overall system. So therefore, it's very important to train people in various BIM skills. And it was very interesting to see the poll results, the first poll results, where people were struggling to get the consistency across projects, as well as struggling to secure the right BIM skills for the businesses. And when you think about training, BIM training, obviously the training forms, two parts of the training. One is process specific, and second is technology specific. You need to have technology to produce, exchange information, validate information, and so forth. At today's webinar, we are going to primarily focus on process part of it, whereby looking at the international standards and look at the roles that you play and how can you use those skills to develop your own business specific workflows, business specific processes and procedures. So moving on, why BIM training though, right? And the first slide we looked at, the people, process and technology part of the overall change management and change implementation. But also we must look at the drivers, the external market drivers. Look at the shifts that that our sector is going through, fundamental shifts in terms of industrialization, some disruptions around digitizing the products as well as processes, even new materials. Look at the new methods of manufacturing, such as 3D printing and other modern methods of construction, and therefore new materials, new ways of building buildings and assets. And it requires not only attracting the best and the brightest in the industry, but also requires reskilling your current workforce. Moving on, just to summarize the principles and some of the things that my colleague Mike mentioned about why training in business and structural learning and talent management relevant in your business. And if we put that in perspective of BIM, the first and foremost, as I mentioned, our sector is going through rapid digitalization now, like it or not, globally, to meet the rapid urbanization demands and climate change challenge. And BIM is an essential step towards the industry-wide digitalization. Hence, we must look at the BIM training as part of your overall talent management and training strategy. The next one is talent attraction. As my colleague Mike mentioned, talent attraction is an important part of the talent management process. How can you attract the best and the brightest? But not only that, how can we attract the digital natives, the next gen, into our industry? We have a reputation for our industry, and we always struggle to attract the best and the brightest and the digital natives. Again, going through the digitalization, one of the benefits that businesses could achieve is attracting digital natives. Hence, look at the BIM training as part of your overall talent strategy. Reskilling current workforce, as I already mentioned, that we have a majority of the workforce have years and years of experience. And how can you offer that best of both worlds to your clients, to your stakeholders? So the years of experience as well as the digital skill sets and digital way of delivering projects. And in order to achieve that best of both worlds and offer that to your clients, you must look at reskilling your current workforce as well in some areas in information management and digital way of delivering projects. The next point is talent retention. And Mike talked about talent management, talent retention, attraction a great deal. So from BIM perspective, how does it look? Investing in your people motivates them to, put simply, motivates them to stay with you. As simple as that. So when employees see that the employers are investing in them, in terms of upskilling them in various digital skills, in the futuristic skills, then it motivates them to stay with, and they get that appreciation of investing in people. The next one is career development, and how can you provide that continuous professional development opportunity to your BIM skills and staff? If you have a dedicated BIM, but not only the dedicated BIM team in your business, but also to various other job functions as well. And part of their roles how can you integrate BIM skills as part of their continuous professional development also. So, and training, IC training is an essential part of that. And overall, as we saw in the poll results, the top challenge that most of the businesses are facing, not only in today's audience, but in the morning audience also, we had the similar challenges articulated. And globally, as we speak to other stakeholders and companies, we are seeing the similar challenges in terms of getting that consistency and quality across the projects. How can you get that? And one way to do that is to skill your workforce in various BIM skills, with equal importance, at all levels, and not just the BIM team, but also your design managers, quality managers, safety managers, procurement, site manager, if you are within construction business. But that equally applies to your design consultancy business or whichever part of that, project lifecycle you belong to. And that in turn then gives you better business outcomes in terms of consistency and quality across your project lifecycle. Moving on. So when it comes to process-specific BIM training, what should you train them on? And we are fortunate to have this ISO 19650, which was launched in December 2018. And it defines clearly, a certain set of functions and therefore expected some skills within the project stakeholders. And when you talk about information management, this particular standard, international best practice, ISO 19650, when you talk about information management, it means two things: organizing information and digitizing information. So the first and foremost, think about how can we organize information in a structured way using whatever the classifications and coding and so forth, and then how can we digitize the information. Moving on, as per ISO 19650, if you're familiar with this standard, there are three key roles articulated in ISO 19650 series of standards. The first one being appointing party. So i.e. typically your client or asset owner who owns the asset that you might be designing or operating or constructing. So that's appointing party right at the top level. Then the second level of stakeholders, I would call them, is lead appointed parties, such as typically, say, during design phase, there might be a lead designer coordinating all the design inputs and outputs from various stakeholders, or it could be during main construction, it could be a main contractor or general contractor, for instance, or it could be on a large EPC contract, it could be just the GC, general contractor or main contractor, doing design and build. So that would be your lead appointed party. And the third role, according to ISO 19650, is appointed party. So anybody that's appointed on a given project, it falls under appointed party. Moving on. So according to the standard and international best practice, the appointing party, stroke client or developer or asset owner have certain functions to obligations as well in order to implement this particular standard in a proper way and information management framework on a given project. And these 8 key functions are outlined on the screen, are very important for client organizations to actually implement throughout the project life cycle. Some of them needs to be done right at the beginning of the project, such as establish simple things like the information requirements. How are you going to procure architects, the design consultants, the main contractors, with what type of information requirements? What do you need? The digital asset, the digital information, and the milestones. Also define, what sort of legal protocols that you should incorporate within your procurement contracts. One of the most important things, also part of the client organization's functions, is about capability and capacity assessment as well, and ensure that the stakeholders that you're appointing have appropriate capability as well as capacity to perform their duties. Moving on. To perform those functions, there are certain skills expected within the appointing party, businesses, with its client, developer, as I said, and some of these skills can be learned on the job as Mike said, unstructured learning, but some of these skills, requires a proper structured learning as per the ISO 19650 framework. And hence, when you're thinking about, if you're a client organization, you're thinking about, the BIM training for your own business, think about those functions and skills accordingly. Moving on. Next is lead appointed party. Just to reiterate, lead appointed party could be during design phase a lead designer, could be an architect, or could be an M&E consultant, depending on the type of the job. And they have certain functions to perform as well, according to ISO 19650, such as cascading information requirements down, coordinating information production across the team, as well as help decide how coordination issues are going to be resolved. Right. So these are some of the functions that the lead appointed party is expected to perform, and therefore, moving on, these are minimum, the skills that are expected within the lead appointed party businesses: coordination management, information management, interface management, generating their package or design scope specific information as well as interfacing with other design consultant if it is during the design phase, or with other subcontractors and contractors if it is during construction. So these are some of the skills expected of the lead appointed party, and therefore I keep going back to the planning of your BIM training for your business. Depending on the role you play, you decide what sort of BIM skills and modules that you should have in your roadmap as part of talent management and training. Moving on. And the last but not the least, appointed party function. So any stakeholder that is not either, that isn't a client or a lead appointed party, they're all appointed party according to ISO 19650. And these are some of the functions that are expected of them in terms of implementing information management framework according to ISO 19650. And therefore, moving on, the skills that are expected of them are interface management, because they will be interfacing with other. So if you are, say, for example, an M&E contractor on a given job, and you are interfacing with a steel subcontractor or a cladding subcontractor or landscape contractor and so forth, so interface management. You're obviously producing your own package specific, design scope specific information as well. And you're also doing your task information management overall. So these are some of the skills expected of you as part of your appointed party obligations under ISO 19650. So moving on. So what could the BIM training or skills development, and therefore the roadmap, could look like for your business? So always start with awareness, basic awareness and fundamentals, obviously. And then as the natural, next step, think about the role that you play in the entire project lifecycle, and think about what's the next module. Is it the project design and delivery phase that you operate in, or is it the asset management and facilities management? And choose that module accordingly. So once you have that BIM awareness, you build your project delivery or asset management specific basics knowledge about the information management in this space. Then the next step you should think about, once you know how to produce information in certain basic processes within project delivery or asset management, think about, okay, how can you, exchange information? What are the, the information schema and so forth? And think about, as part of the BIM skills development and roadmap, think about that as the next natural step in that roadmap skills development. The next step you should think about, if you're into construction business and subcontracting business, think about how can you leverage BIM skills and integrate that with safety and enhance safety initiatives on sites in terms of improving safety planning, training, and also managing safety issues on site as well through BIM interface. And last but not the least, think about a security-minded approach as well with BIM, because it is all digital information. Obviously, we need to be very careful about sensitive assets and and the information, and ensure that you have the right processes implemented about the security around BIM information and overall digital information, to be honest. So these are the key steps, but let's not forget that you also building parallelly your practical implementation experience with this. alongside the structured learning and learning about the information management basics and so forth. So yeah, the two need to go hand in hand. What you learn, obviously, you need to implement that on real projects as well. Moving on. The last but not the least in terms of the BIM skills roadmap is about assessment. And my colleague Mike emphasized a lot in terms of assessment. To me, in practical terms, what I have seen working for architects and main contractors, we do assessment at every stage of the project, believe it or not. So, you have simple things like if you're a designer, you produce some drawings, deliverables, and you do the checking internally to ensure that it meets the client requirements. So that's kind of check, call it check or assessment. That's we do. You apply for planning permission, and the building regulations guy, the council guys, they check your design submission against the building regs, and they give results based on that assessment. Equally, it is very important for employers also to ensure that the learning that they are imparting onto their staff, and they're putting them through, that they're achieving certain skills consistently, and therefore your target is to achieve that consistency and quality across all projects, right? And this is where I'm so pleased to inform you that at BSI we have launched today the brand new, we call them BIM qualifications, but think of them as assessing your learning, assessing your staff's learning journey. So once they build the fundamentals knowledge, you can have that assessment, so they have that confidence that they've achieved certain global benchmark in the skills and so forth. And you can go through all these milestones and achieve different qualifications such as project information practitioner, professional, or certified professional. Moving on, if you are within the asset management portfolio and part of the project life cycle, then you can apply the similar principles and achieve this skills in a gradual, in an incremental way, and get your staff to validate or verify their skills as they continue to learn and build their skills in BIM. And ultimately, at the end, you can go and apply for certified professional badge. I would hate to say that as a badge, but it's basically about verifying your practical implementation experience. That you learned all this theory, you started implementing it, you achieved certain level, and then how can I verify that I've got that practical experience of implementing that? So you could do that as well towards that journey. So I think overall, I would like to summarize that the principles that Mike talked about, the talent management, the structured learning, it applies to everything in life, right? It's not just BIM. But I showed you that how you can apply those principles during the BIM skills development within your business. How can you leverage these assessment processes to ensure that your staff at all levels are achieving the global benchmark in skills, call it qualification or not, and then help them in their career development. So I hope that was useful, and thanks for your patience, and thanks for listening in. Thank you. And over to my colleague Charlotte.
Thank you, Rahul, and lots of useful insight direct from Rahul's experience of working with industry. So before we come to our Q&A session, I'd just like to share with you what your BIM journey could look like, so that you can see where gaining the right level of BIM knowledge really can support your own BIM adoption. And we appreciate that people are at different stages, of course. So if you haven't at this point in time, a good place to start would be to take a look, read, digest, and get to grips with the BIM standards. And there are a whole suite of these designed to help organisations firstly understand the whole journey from design to handover. But this is also underpinned by specific standards which support the different stages, from design and construction to BIM and health and safety, and obviously information security, very important in the digital space. And then we have our training courses, of course, and the qualifications which are now available, which we're very excited about and industry has been asking us for. And ultimately, we do work with a good number of clients around the world who look for the validation of the maturity of their own BIM processes within their organisation and the delivery of BIM projects. So you can see a journey mapped out there for you. And moving on, where to go for more information. Now, we're very keen that we share as much as we can with you. We do have a lot of resources that are available looking at BIM, the standards themselves, of course, the training and the qualifications that we've been covering today, and certification. And a few weeks ago, Rahul and I ran another webinar, which is called Why is BIM Good for Your Business? So we thought that would be, again, a helpful place to start for people who may be thinking about this and getting on board with it. And that webinar is available on demand, so please do have a look for that. We also have our little book of BIM, which we update every time there's something new to say, which in recent months and years has been around the introduction of the new international standards. But we also have a new training guide which walks you through exactly the different courses which are available to you, and of course our new qualifications and certified professional solutions for you as well.
A very informative and interesting session there from BSI on talent management and career development in BIM. And we now have Rahul Shah, the Client Director for Built Environment at BSI, here to continue the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Rahul.
Thanks for having me, Laura.
Really fantastic presentation there as well. Thank you. Very detailed. We've had quite a few questions come in as well, of course. The first question is, BIM training requires a considerable investment in knowledge and technology. Can you sum up the top 3 reasons to build a business case for investment?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks, Laura, for asking the question. I think it all depends on what your strategic drivers are and who you are in the supply chain, to be honest. So if you're an architect, for example, or a design consultant, and one of your strategic goals is to as part of your digitalization journey, is to implement BIM and improve productivity, and therefore win more business. So that could be your top 2, for example, drivers, win more business, because there are, believe me or not, there are clients and projects around the world where, in order for you to qualify to bid for the projects, you have to demonstrate BIM capabilities. So number 1 is about business growth, winning business. Number 2 could be, improving productivity and efficiencies, right? Now, again, as I said, the top 3 could vary slightly based on who you are. So for example, if you are a main contractor or subcontractor and you're conscious about safety on site, and I would put that as the top 3, one of the top 3 in the list. And that, how can I utilize BIM and digital information to improve safety initiatives on site? So, it varies, but I think those are the top 3 I would put, winning more business, business growth, productivity improvement, and safety and improving safety initiatives. Of course, there are many more, benefits to be had, by implementing BIM digital for your business. So I hope that answers.
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you. I hope that has answered our attendees' question. I'm sure it has. Our next question is on SMEs. Do you have any advice for small to medium-sized companies when it comes to implementing a successful talent management strategy?
Yeah, I don't think, in principle, Laura, I don't think that whether you're SME or large enterprise, it varies. It's about scale, isn't it? It's about scale. The principles, you can equally apply those principles to small and medium-sized enterprises as well. At the end of the day, it's all about, if you're running a business, whether you're a small, medium, or large enterprise, it's about, from the talent management lens, it's about attracting the best talent to deliver the best products, services to your client, to serve your client in the best possible way. So you need to have not only the best hardware and software, but you also need the best brainware, right? And so from talent management perspective, if you're SME or large enterprise, I think what varies is about the scale and the size and the investment that you have to make to attract, retain, and nurture talent for your business. So I think in principle, I don't think that those principles vary too much based on the size of the business. It's about the scale, and how much you apply those principles, looking at your business, as well as the role that you play in the supply chain. If you're a product manufacturer, then it's a slightly different role, and therefore the slightly different talent management strategy, versus if you are in a service industry where you're selling services and therefore the talent, versus product manufacturing is you're selling products, right? And therefore the talent required there and the talent management is slightly different, and therefore the strategy.
It's always going to vary, isn't it? Of course.
Yeah.
The next question we have is that we have a graduate scheme in our business with a clear roadmap of various training programs. Is it advisable to incorporate BIM training as a part of this scheme? And if so, what's the best way to incorporate this?
You know what, Laura, I couldn't agree more with that question, actually. The answer is definite yes, right? Answer is definite yes. It's a really interesting question, especially for, the previous question you asked about SME versus large enterprise. Especially in large enterprise, I was seeing most large enterprises around the world, they have very established graduate schemes. They take X number of graduates a year, right? And they typically have like a year or 2 year long kind of, a well mapped out graduate, program, like the training program. And they, rotate them through various business skills, whether it's quantity surveying, whether it's design, whether it's quality inspection, and so forth, if you're into main construction or main contractor, for example. And therefore, because BIM is a fundamental part of nowadays, doing business, it only makes sense to actually incorporate structured BIM learning as part of the graduate scheme. I think the answer is definite yes. How you can go about it, it depends on, what your graduate scheme plan is, and the program is. But looking at the, our BSI BIM training modules, as you would have noticed that, we have a carefully crafted 5, individual modules. It's like an incremental journey. So what you could do is, if your graduate scheme is made up of, say, 12 months program, you could think about incorporating, say, first module in first 2 months, and then, so forth. So you can spread those 5 or 6 modules over 12 months graduate program. So short answer is definitely yes. I think you should think about incorporating BSI BIM training program. How depends on your, the length of the graduate scheme program. But yeah, you can spread those modules over the course of maybe 12 months or something.
Brilliant. Thank you for clearing that up for us. Thank you. Great advice as well. Is it possible to align our internal BIM training so that our staff can receive BSI's qualifications once they complete our internal training? Is our next question.
Again, yeah, short answer is yes. How we go about it, obviously from BSI point of view, one thing we need to make sure is that the BIM training program that you have, internal BIM training program, your company specific, meets the specific learning objectives that we have set out, for our own training program. As long as your training program meets those learning objectives, I think we can do that mapping. It requires that, one-off mapping exercise. Once that's mapped, and BSI, BSI, our technical team is, satisfied with the learning outcomes mapping, then there is no reason why your training programs and your own staff going through your own training program, why they can't achieve a BSI qualification. So absolutely, it is possible. It's just a matter of mapping the learning objectives, your training programs, and the BSI standard training programs. Yes.
We move on now to our final question from our attendees today. When hiring consultants and contractors to deliver our assets and asset managers to manage our assets, do we still need to train our technical staff in BIM skills? And if so, please do provide some guidance on what type of BIM training we should be giving to our staff.
Thanks, Laura. It's a very interesting question. And, if you remember, a few slides, in the presentations we had according to ISO 19650, there are clear obligations for the appointing parties, stroke clients, stroke developer, stroke, asset owners, right, asset managers. So there are clear, functions or activities or, roles expected of asset owners or asset managers as part of this whole information management framework. And therefore, it required specific skill set as well. So I would say absolutely, I think it is strongly advisable that asset owners and clients look at some sort of training programs, BIM training programs for their own staff upskilling. That's number one, technical level. On a appointment level, you mentioned part of the questions. You mentioned that they will be appointing, for example, architects, engineers, main contractors. That's their role, right? So when they're appointing, obviously they'll have to put obligations for the design consultants, for the main contractors, everybody in appointment contracts as well. So it could only help them if they have some knowledge about, what the designers, what the main contractors should be doing, or what should be their obligations, according to ISO 19650. And therefore, it is advisable for them to also, even though they are not, for example, going to be performing designer-specific BIM tasks, it is advisable for them, so that they have enough appreciation of what designers need to do. It is advisable for them to go through that level of training as well, so that they are aware that what the design consultants they are appointing, main contractors they are appointing, should be doing or are doing, so that they can check as well. So absolutely, it is advisable for the asset owners, asset managers to go through a level of BIM training. Again, what that looks like, it depends on the job functions. And they could contact BSI. We'll be happy to help them, with, their various different job functions at BSI. One of the things that we also support clients in is that it's not just the off-the-shelf BIM training program, but our team can work with your L&D and HR teams. We can sit down, we can go through the training needs analysis piece, and we can come up with a proper training, sort of BIM training pathway for your asset management teams. They may not need all BIM training programs, but we can help you identify which ones are the relevant ones for your teams.
Well, a lot of brilliant advice, a very detailed presentation, and a lot of information. So just to wrap up, maybe you could give us some of your key takeaways and key highlights that you'd like our audience to go away with.
Yeah, sure, Laura. With respect to BIM and BIM training, and I know today's topic is about BIM training and talent management, I think we must put this in the wider context and bigger context of the industry, and especially the challenges that the world is currently going through in terms of the pandemic and and overall economic challenges that most economies are going through. And a couple of enablers to help us improve that economic growth. One is obviously absolutely digitization. Digitization is very, very high on the agenda for most of the economies around the world. And when it comes to digitizations and innovation to our sector, built environment sector, BIM is a fundamental part of digitization of our industry, right? And therefore, it is only, it's just strongly advisable that businesses of all size, whether you're SME, small, medium, or large enterprises, to carefully think about, the talent management piece in terms of attracting, retaining, and nurturing the right talent in the digital space. So my advice and key takeaway for the audience would be that, please do consider, BIM element as part of your overall talent management strategy, and think about how best you can not only attract the BIM-ready talent from universities, but also upskill your current workforce, as well as part of the retention strategy, that how can you gradually build that BIM capability as part of your business to facilitate digitizations of your business, and therefore move the industry forward as well together.
Well, digitization and innovation really have been two very strong themes actually over the last couple of days, and very hot topic at the moment as well, of course. Rahul, Shah, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for your time and that brilliant presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Laura, for having me. Thank you.